Hey, welcome. We are here today to talk about the big wave of AI data centers that are being proposed and planned across the country. It's a big issue for so many communities. Joining us today are Shelley Copsey. She is CEO and co-founder of FYLD. It's a field work infrastructure AI technology firm. And Brian Strawberry, he's chief economist with FMI Corp. They are a consulting and investment bank advisory firm. They both have great and deep insight into the AI and data center spaces. We really appreciate them joining us. Also at the helm with me is Eli Wohlenhaus. He is director of digital news strategy and AI strategies for Adams MultiMedia. It's quite a mouthful of titles that Eli
Yes.
has. He does a lot for our media company. Eli, why don't you kick us off? You can tell us a little bit about Adams Multimedia's reach, how we've been covering data centers, and then we'll get into this great discussion with our great guests.
Yeah, so the reason we're here today is Adams Multimedia. We're a family-owned media company that spans 20 states, not 20 countries, maybe someday. And we have a lot of communities who are covering this each week. Whether it's a government discussing whether or not there's zoning for this, there's room for this, and the people being outspoken about it. And so that's what we want to talk about today is how this is impacting everyday rural communities and metro areas across the country.
Shelley, I want to start off with you. There's so many questions that folks have. Well, Eli mentioned, the town halls and the meetings, and there's lots of media coverage. There's so many questions about it. What's kind of driving all this? Why do we need all these new data centers? What's driving it? And also kind of who needs it and what do we need it for?
I guess that at its simplest, companies like Field right through to your hyperscalers, they're demanding more and more compute power, right? And if you look at where we are today, there is simply not enough compute power when you begin to look at the demands that we're going to have into, the next 3, 5 years even to run more and more AI systems. So you can kind of see where the huge demand is coming from. I think we can even just all reflect in our everyday lives, how we're using more and more technology, each and every day. But I guess, conversely, people are looking into their own backyards and saying, do I want this in my yard? We've got a lot of grid instability already, as we see climate change take hold, et cetera. And I think you begin to look at, the struggles of, do we have water security? Do we have energy security? Do I like how this is going to look and feel? But at the same time, I want access to these technologies. It's, a convergence of a number of factors that I think is causing this to be a highly populist issue right at this moment.
I do think the one irony that's popped up in discussions about this is everything we're doing, including here, is running through some kind of data center operation, and so yeah, we're all interconnected by this. Our daily lives, our businesses, our schools, everything we do. But now, and data centers have been around for a long time, but now, like you said, there's a lot of concerns about what these new ones look like and feel like.
Indeed. I just think you go from its basics that these types of data centers were often well away from where we lived. There were not so many of them, and now you can't, drive down any major road in any rural community without beginning to see them pop up. And you have to understand that, if you're living in those communities, you're going to begin to think about what it means for you. But I think often we hear the negative aspects, and there's obviously a lot of positive aspects, right? The level of employment that this can bring, communities that take a 5, 10, 15-year view, that if these types of assets come into their backyard, it is going to mean that we need to shore up energy supply into the regions. We're going to need to increase the level of water coming in. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. Who are the communities that think about the long-term benefits? How do they jointly plan? I mean, these data centers are not going away. I think that we might see some really big winners and losers in rural communities based on who can take a long-term holistic view and who can work more collaboratively with the people that are beginning to build these massive data centers.
Yeah, so Brian, from your perspective, what are the things that you see and hear? Mike and I, and within our media company, we hear from the community level, we hear from residents who, get upset about anything new. It doesn't just have to be data centers, but from your perspective, what do you see and hear on this topic the most?
Yeah, so I'm coming at this looking at or basically trying to measure construction activity across the country, and data centers is is basically in the spotlight in the construction industry for its significant growth. The it's an interesting development, this kind of social pushback on data center construction is, from my perspective, causing a lot of disruption in the owner's plans to get the data centers built. And as a result, I think the confidence we have in the projects that are planned is lower, but also I'm expecting owners to be kind of more diversifying their investments, whereas historically it may have been one project. Now they have to look at 4 or 5 different sites to make sure that they get their investment installed and up and running. And that is further accelerating the community pushback and the amount of data centers that are in planning right now. Not only the community pushback, but just the potential tax on all the infrastructure if all of these proposed projects go through. I'm looking at this in terms of regulation, trying to understand where data centers are likely to end up based on where regulation is not, or is planned. And you've got a whole like kind of broad landscape between kind of what Texas is doing versus what New York is doing versus what other states are, maybe behind on. But it's a major concern, and it's kind of like the owners and builders are racing to figure out how to get their projects installed to kind of navigate around this regulation and this pushback, and it's kind of a race right now.
What's maybe
One
the
thing
biggest difference?
Okay.
Sorry, Mike. What's one of the biggest differences you see now and maybe 10 years ago? Because these existed
Oh, yeah.
before today, and now
Yeah,
it's just
so
a hot topic.
from a numbers standpoint, um, in 2020, this was a $10 billion a year market. It looks like, based on the data that came out at the beginning of this week, we may be underreporting what 2026 looks like. We're estimating 60 billion, and so yeah, uh, basically 10 billion a year added on an
Yeah.
annualized basis. It's significant growth, and alongside that growth, you got supply issues. You got a whole bunch of issues. I mean, Shelley, on the labor side, this is significant that we're tracking also. So yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, the landscape significantly different. Even 5 years ago, 6 years ago, significantly different.
I think one concern that folks have locally, in addition to the water and the energy, which we can get into a little bit, is obsolescence. Is there a concern that what happens in 5 years, in 10 years going forward, in terms of how chips are cooled? Obviously, we've heard talk about whether we're going to put these things in space or on the oceans. Where are we at with that? And is that a valid concern? I know communities are, looking at some of the long-term benefits of these things, but they are concerned about, well, what happens if the whole landscape changes? Are they going to be stuck with these data centers, the new ones, sitting empty?
I have a hypothesis. I don't know that I have the answer, but thinking about how these owners have built in the past is more of like a campus. And right now, it makes the most sense just to build a new building versus renovate an existing building in order to bring in the cooling systems or whatever is needed. You're not disrupting your kind of economics of that building operating, and is cheaper and more efficient to build it right the first time than it is to renovate. Um, that said, when these owners kind of find a site, they end up buying hundreds or thousands of acres at a time. So theoretically they have the ability to build new buildings on their site. But going back to the infrastructure side, my theory or hypothesis on this is that they are going to need to solve their own problems for the infrastructure. And I think that there's probably some silver lining in that for the communities where they end up because of how much investment they're going to bring to that community on the power side, the water side, and whatever else is needed to basically create a strong grid and strong water infrastructure if needed.
Shelley, your company has a very interesting kind of business model. Can you talk about that really quick and how that fits into this data center and AI wave that we're seeing?
Yeah, so
I think folks would be really interested in that.
Field, we work with infrastructure companies that, put 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people out to work every day. And we work with them to get real-time situational awareness of what those field workers are doing. I think that most people would get a surprise at how many of these operations run on WhatsApp, email, phone calls versus data-led intelligence about what's going on in the field. So we effectively crowdsource information. We get these people doing the work to take short videos. We've got a really big data set. We help our customers predict where operational risk will arise. But I mean, relevant to what's going on here, right? We're seeing craft workers pulled away from the traditional utilities sector, our highways, heavy civils, and we're seeing them be redirected to either the build out of the data centers or private grids, etc., that are needed to connect onto the main grid. But we track 35% standing time on site. And so again, I think what's going to be really interesting and going to, Brian's point around, does this become irrelevant infrastructure? Does it, sit there and go to waste? I think there's not enough craft workers. We don't see that correcting, in the 10, 20-year horizon. I suspect we are going to see a world where there's very little choice but to retrofit, upgrade. Of course, we're going to be looking at space. Even I saw Y Combinator today calling for people building data centers in the sea. But, I think practically we're going to have to see retrofit and people solving problems when we look at the labour shortages that are being faced.
So maybe within the context of that, Shelley, what's maybe a myth that seems to exist in the general public that you could say, hey, that's not actually what we're doing here, as it relates to building and creating data centers?
I think that the biggest myth that we see is that the workforce is largely inefficient when they do these types of build outs, right? Like if you live in the community and you're going past them, it looks like it takes forever. And you probably begin to draw analogies to what do we see when we drive down the street and people are digging up roads. And I think people just generally think that in the physical world, in the built environment, that things are not really run very efficiently, but they often look to the field worker. I think the biggest thing that we will see, and I think that we're going to see the hyperscalers, the people that are building these data centers have to solve, is how do we keep every person very efficient and very safe every moment of the day. When you look at the sheer demand of compute power that we're looking for, we've got to get better at building and commissioning these types of data centers. And, when you also bring in that people don't want them in their own backyard and that there are going to be most certainly supply pinch points, we need the centers that are being allowed to proceed to be built very well, very efficiently and commissioned on time.
Brian, there's a lot of talk about water and energy in terms of the needs of these new data centers and the concerns that communities have. Which is a bigger concern and which is a bigger challenge for the folks building those?
It really depends on the site or the community, but historically, power has been the number one kind of determinant driver of where a site is selected. Cost of power and then connectivity is now
What's the end?
Is water less of a concern? Covering this, I'd done a introductory course on closed loop cooling systems
Yeah.
and those types of things that I didn't learn in journalism school. And I've talked to folks in this space, and they seem to think that obviously it does depend on location and region, but is water less of a concern? Because when you go to these meetings or hear people talk, water does come up. Is that a little bit of a, I want to call it a red herring, but is in some cases is it less of a concern than the power grid?
I think so. I think a lot of the water research has been overstated, but I will say that the smaller of a community that you land in, the more likely the water infrastructure is going to be a big deal, because it probably just doesn't exist. And I would hope or expect that if a data center is picking that site, they have a plan to upgrade the water infrastructure for their needs and likely for the community.
So I'm thinking long term here. I know many of our markets in Maryland, Iowa, Ohio, and others have had local governments sign moratoriums on deciding whether or not data center can come in, even be discussed. What's the fallout of continual pushback or um, declined sites as we continue to see the boon of use of artificial intelligence and the need for these?
I think doing it well, you end up with good owners picking your sites, and then those good owners become good neighbors. And what doing it well looks like, from my perspective so far, like looking at how different states are approaching this, like I would say Texas is probably the best case, where they're laying out like if you're going to build a data center of this size, you need to have plans for all of this and have contracts, and it basically scares away the speculators, the kind of the bad neighbor owners, and encourages the good owners to build a business case for their site.
Shelley, we kind of talked about this in previous discussions. I think Brian and I talked about this before. The amount of money behind this is quite a force of capital. I think was the phrase that we use. We have some of the wealthiest companies in the world: Meta, Amazon, Alphabet, Google, Microsoft. Some of the richest people in the world: Elon Musk and Larry Ellison and Zuckerberg and Mr. Bezos. Are those the ones that are probably most likely to get built, the hyperscalers, and some of the other folks, maybe some of the real estate folks that are trying to get into this, are those maybe less likely to get built? And I think a lot of people are curious about what's the time frame for these. I know some are under construction. There's such a race to market, probably like we haven't seen maybe since the railroads or the Industrial Revolution. Are we just going to see a lot of the bigger, wealthier folks build these things, or will it be a little more diversified, open marketplace? And what do you think the time frame is for really to see a lot of these come online?
I think it's an interesting point. If you go back to what Brian said a minute ago, that when the states begin to regulate properly, when they care about like broader connections to the grid and they begin to care about the impact on the community, you then have to begin to think who's got the money to actually invest in the community and invest in the data center. And it almost brings you back to thinking about the world of utilities, where I spend a lot of my life, right? Like a utility is part of a community. And I think we'll see a similar type of system emerge, that if they're not good operators, what will happen? Will they have, license to continue operating from a social good perspective? But it's also interesting. Some of the companies you've just mentioned, on the one hand, they need to have social license to operate. They've got all of our data, but then we haven't always seen those companies, do the best social good with our data as well. I think it's a very interesting area. But I mean, we are seeing a proliferation of new organizations come up and begin to build data centers. I think whenever you've got this level of flux in an economy, some of the old crew will win again, but there's, I think very definitely, some new winners will emerge. If I go to, like the area I work in, what we're really seeing is the general contractors that are adopting AI into their workflows. I think we're beginning to see a level of industry consolidation with those that don't, right? Because they get that first mover advantage, they get better profit margins, they've got better free cash flow, and they can continue to invest more and more. So I think, we'll also maybe see a divergence of who wins and who loses based on who can adopt new technologies and build and commission the data centers most efficiently.
Excellent. So Brian Strawberry and Shelley Copsey have joined Mike Sunnucks and I today in this conversation, and we could probably talk about this for a very long time. We're going to wrap up soon. Shelley and Brian, is there anything that we haven't covered in this conversation that you feel like needs to be said from your perspective, or maybe that people need to hear as it relates to data centers? Shelley, why don't you go ahead first?
I think it's a super interesting area. It will be just really interesting to see social impact, how communities begin to change their views, and economically who wins and loses over the next 3-5 years.
Yeah, and maybe something of interest to me, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, Shelley. Prefabrication as a means to build these facilities efficiently is definitely on the rise, and I would expect the more that this wave or trend gets rooted in construction practices, I think it has the ability to change the way that we build things, not just data centers, but everything. But I know that these owners are using prefab as a means to deliver these giant facilities quickly.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for joining us again. From Adams Multimedia perspective, Mike Sunnucks here, the enterprise editor, has written, and we'll continue to write a series on this topic where we talk to experts just like you about everything going on, what it means to be in the data center world, and what that looks like to people in everyday markets like you. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys, both of you.